In our headlines on this Thursday, August 20th, here in South Korea. U.S. President Donald Trump claims he'll meet with North Korea's Kim Jong-un before the end of this year, while the latter's sister Kim Yo-jong says her brother holds good memories of the U.S. leader. Meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung says he respects Trump's decision to downscale defense drills to establish an environment for engagement on the Korean peninsula. And amid the renewed attention on potential dialogue between Washington and Pyongyang, the top diplomats of Seoul and Beijing meet here in South Korea for talks on regional peace and stability. We start with prospects of a new chapter in U.S.-North Korea diplomacy as Donald Trump speaks of meeting Kim Jong-un within this year, while sharing a specific number with regard to the regime's nuclear weapons. Park Jun-han has our top story.
U.S. President Donald Trump once again highlighted his personal relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and said he would meet Kim for a summit later this year. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump also provided an update on the exact size of Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal.
The fact that I get along with him, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. He has 57 very powerful nuclear weapons. Should have never allowed it to happen. They should have never allowed it. If I were president, I wouldn't have allowed it, but he's got them.
Trump also confirmed he expects to meet Kim Jong-un later this year. The U.S. president could potentially be in Asia in mid-November for the annual APEC summit, which is being held in China. Trump's specific mention of 57 nuclear warheads closely aligns with recent estimates from international think tanks. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute recently estimated that North Korea has assembled around 60 warheads, while the U.S. Congressional Research Service cited estimates at around 50. However, a sitting U.S. president publicly confirming this number is raising questions about a potential policy shift. For decades, the U.S. has maintained a stance of complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. But openly recognizing the specific number of weapons is being interpreted by some as treating North Korea as a de facto nuclear power. With the U.S. administration showing a strong preference for deal-making, some say the U.S. could recognize North Korea as a nuclear-armed state and change its diplomatic stance by seeking a freeze of its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
North Korea's Kim Jong-un has good memories of Donald Trump. Now, this is according to his sister Kim Yo-jong in what is the regime's first acknowledgement of Mr. Trump's most recent efforts at rapprochement. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump sent a series of comments and claims in an effort to reach out to North Korea, which also prompted a response in what analysts now see as a phase of testing the waters between both sides. North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister, shared a message through state-run media Korean Central News Agency at 10 p.m. Wednesday dismissing Washington's decision to scale back joint military exercises and denying direct communication between its leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. However, the message's timing has grabbed attention.
That shows Pyongyang sees this as a sensitive issue and intends to manage the message actively and quickly. Responding at 10 p.m., right as the details were coming out of the U.S. side, shows a strong intent to actively manage the message.
While Kim Yo-jong claimed the regime feels no interest in temporary drill reduction, saying Pyongyang will not respond if Washington attempts to frame the scale-back exercises as a goodwill gesture, she emphasized the North Korean leader still maintains good memories and feelings toward Trump personally.
This isn't a direct refusal to talk. I think it's Pyongyang maintaining ambiguity around the two leaders' personal ties, while pressing Washington to come forward with a firmer, more concrete commitment to end its hostile policy toward the North.
Analysts say North Korea is holding out for substantial policy shifts before agreeing to formal negotiations. Meanwhile, South Korea's Unification Ministry urged the regime to engage, noting that Trump's decision aims to initiate dialogue and promote peace. A ministry official stressed that ending the war and establishing peace on the Korean peninsula must be prioritized above all else. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, at the Blue House, President Lee Jae-myung has shared support for his U.S. counterpart's scaling back of joint defense drills to promote peace and potential dialogue on the Korean Peninsula. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min covers his remarks.
Citing President Trump's recent social media posts, President Lee Jae-myung said he agrees with the U.S. leaders' will and efforts to build peace on the Korean Peninsula, even at the cost of scaling down the annual Seoul-Washington combined defense drills. On social media on Wednesday, Lee called it a big decision to move beyond hostility and said he respected the U.S. president's efforts to create an environment to resume dialogue with North Korea. The South Korean president hoped for trust building and a resumption of talks between North Korea and the U.S., reiterating to take on the role of a pacemaker, while Trump plays the role of a peacemaker. He added that he hoped to meet with his American counterpart in the near future. He also said he fully agreed with Trump that Seoul should be responsible for its own defense, comments he often revisits, adding that the country is ranked 5th in global military power and that it aims to increase defense spending to 3.5% of its GDP.
동맹이 굳건해야 안보의 근간이 더 튼튼해질 것이고 또 우리 자신의 힘을 키워야 동맹으로서의 가치와 필요성도 더 커지게 됩니다.
On the efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the South Korean leader noted that the country will continue to communicate closely with the U.S. and review its contribution within the purview of domestic law. Trump has accused South Korea of not joining action against Iran. The main opposition People Power Party criticized President Lee's comments on the reduction of the joint drill as a, quote, psychological victory, arguing that the Iran war and a delay in U.S. investment are the main factors. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Also here in Seoul, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun sat down with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi back on Wednesday, ahead of the latter's meeting with President Lee Jae-myung on this Thursday to address a host of issues, including North Korea. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young has the latest.
President Lee Jae-myung met with China's top diplomat Wang Yi on Thursday as Seoul and Beijing seek ways to fully restore bilateral ties and as Yi calls for a peace regime with Pyongyang. The meeting took place in the morning following the Chinese officials' talks with Foreign Minister Cho Hyun on Wednesday. Over their 4-hour talks and official dinner, the two diplomats discussed affairs on the Korean Peninsula, with Cho requesting China's constructive role in securing Pyongyang's return to talks.
As much as President Lee Jae-myung presented a blueprint for peaceful coexistence on the Korean Peninsula in his recent Liberation Day address, the government will continue working toward the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the achievement of peace.
According to Seoul officials, Wang said China's policy remained consistent and pledged to keep playing a constructive role in promoting peace and stability.
We also hope that South Korea and North Korea can gradually move along the path towards peace and coexistence, and sincerely wish for the continued stability and development of the Korean Peninsula.
The Chinese minister, however, did not mention denuclearization. As Wang left his meeting, he told the media that renewed dialogue was a matter for the United States and North Korea to decide. He placed the onus on Washington, saying it must change its long-standing hostile policy towards North Korea. This highlights lingering differences between Seoul and Beijing amid a deepening US-China rivalry over regional security and technology. Still, both sides have sought to rebuild cooperation, with the ministers saying there was steady improvement in their bilateral ties following reciprocal state visits by their leaders.
This marks Wang's first official visit to Korea in almost 5 years and comes ahead of the two countries' 34th anniversary of diplomatic relations, which falls on August 24th.
The ministers agreed to use next year's 35th anniversary to elevate their ties, focusing on services and investment negotiations under the bilateral free trade agreement, supply chain stability, people-to-people and cultural exchanges, bringing pandas to Korea, and preserving Korean independence movement sites in China. According to a foreign ministry official on Thursday, the two sides also agreed to work towards another leaders' meeting when China hosts the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in November. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The National Assembly has approved an amendment that reduces the maximum review period for fast-track bills from 330 days to just 90 days. Lawmakers voted during Thursday's plenary session after the main opposition People Power Party's filibuster against the bill automatically expired when July's parliamentary session ended. The ruling Democratic Party pushed the amendment through as part of a session to process over 70 bills that were agreed upon with the opposition. Several real estate-related measures, meanwhile, were postponed to next week, pending talks between the land minister and the mayor of Seoul. U.S. President Donald Trump is escalating his economic pressure on Iran via an unprecedented isolation campaign. Our Ishihu explains.
U.S. President Donald Trump has warned of, quote, tremendous economic consequences against those who engage in business activities with Iran. Writing on Truth Social on Wednesday, Trump declared what he calls the most crushing economic operation against those who, he says, swap lines, cash transfers, and exchange houses with Iran. This comes after a 60-day ceasefire between the two countries expired on Monday after they failed to reach any fresh agreements. When asked whether there will be, quote, impactful sanctions on Iran this week, Trump replied,
well, we have things that we could sanction. We have very draconian sanctions, and we'll see what happens.
Back in April, the U.S. launched sanctions against foreign banks and firms that do business with Iran. Ishihu, Arirang News.
Also in the U.S., Wall Street garnered some breathing room as U.S. Treasury yields eased, that is, after the Treasury Department moved to boost liquidity in the long-term bond market. Our economics correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reports.
U.S. stocks closed slightly higher on Wednesday as the U.S. Treasury Department announced that it would at least double the size of its long-term bond buybacks. This came just a day after the 30-year Treasury yield had surged to a 19-year high, putting pressure on the markets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 119.65 points, or 0.22% from the previous session, to close at 53,463.05. The S&P 500 rose 0.21% to 7,707.98, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq went up by 0.16% to finish at 26,331.09. The market focused on the U.S. Treasury's buyback announcement, which said it would at least double the size of the buybacks for 10 to 30-year Treasury bonds, with each purchase to increase from $2 billion to at least $4 billion, temporarily from September 9th through November 4th. With this announcement, the 30-year Treasury yield fell as low as 5.18%, marking its biggest one-day decline since late June. The 10-year yield also fell to as low as 4.63%. With the bond market having been calmed at least for now, Trump downplayed concerns around the bond market, saying the country is doing well.
Because, like I said, our country is doing so well despite interest rates. I think we have a very powerful country, and we're powering through these ridiculous interest rates.
While calling interest rates artificially high, Trump further pushed the Fed to lower interest rates. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
In other news now, a long-shuttered tungsten mine here in South Korea is back in operation, placing the country at the center of the U.S.-China race to secure critical minerals. Our Kim Jun-hong was there.
Blasting takes place in the dark as geologists and workers move in and out. This is Sangdong Mine in southern Gangwon-do province, one of the world's largest tungsten mines. Some 4.7 kilometers of tunnels lie beneath the site, where there are an estimated 58 million tons of reserves. Tungsten is invisible to the naked eye, but under UV light in the dark, it becomes visible in a distinctive blue. Sangdong had closed its doors amid competition from cheaper Chinese tungsten. But more than 3 decades later, the mine has reopened with full-scale commercial production. Annual output stands at around 2,300 tons, with processing capacity set to double in phases.
Tungsten deposits here have an average grade of about 0.43%. That's about 3 times the global average, which allows for stable production over the long term.
Tungsten is key to industries from defense and semiconductors to aerospace. Demand has surged for high-performance chips, while the U.S.-Iran war has further strained global supplies. Chinese export controls are adding to the squeeze. The country produces around 80% of the world's tungsten, but supplies have fallen sharply since Beijing restricted exports of critical minerals last year, citing national security. Tungsten prices have soared since then. With critical minerals emerging as a new geopolitical weapon, Washington is racing to cut its reliance on China and diversify supplies. That is putting Sangdong in the spotlight as a key source of non-Chinese tungsten, with most of its output contracted for the U.S.
Building a value chain to develop and supply more tungsten is strategically important for Korea amid China's export controls. This would serve as an alternative supply source for our allies. Such cooperation could later act as a bargaining card for Korea to secure critical resources when needed.
For now, Sangdong handles the initial stages of production, including mining and concentrating. Operator Almonte Korea Tungsten plans additional facilities nearby as plans for downstream processing gain pace. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News, 영월.
Meanwhile, out at sea, powerful winds are being turned into electricity as South Korea looks to offshore wind to help drive its clean energy transition. Our Shin So-eun files this report.
As cleaner energy and reduced reliance on non-renewable and imported fuels become increasingly important to national competitiveness, Korea is racing to capture more offshore wind, a resource that could help shape the next era of its energy transition. Leveraging an abundant and freely available resource at scale, the Nagwar offshore wind farm stretches across the sea, about 20 kilometers off the coast of Yeonggwang.
Up close, a massive scale of these turbines is striking, and the power generated from here must be transmitted back to the mainland. 33 turbines are currently in operation, but when 64 of them becomes fully online, this wind farm can create electricity to around 250,000 households.
According to the International Energy Agency, every gigawatt of offshore wind that replaces coal-fired power can avoid more than 3.5 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions each year. Korea is set to emerge as a new gigawatt-scale offshore wind market as global capacity is set to nearly quadruple by 2030.
Construction began in March 2024 and is now 90% complete. Once finished, Nagwar will add 365 megawatts, more than doubling Korea's offshore wind capacity to 718 megawatts.
Each turbine is powered by 81-meter blades that span a 165-meter rotor diameter, which is 1.5 football fields across. Then, electricity generated by each turbine is carried ashore through subsea cables. The turbine can generate energy automatically and shut down in extreme weather conditions like typhoons for safety precautions. 360-degree monitoring cameras also help prevent wildlife collisions.
Each turbine has hundreds of sensors tracking wind, power output, temperature, and vibration in real time, allowing us to monitor its condition remotely.
With President Lee Jae-myung's aerial inspection of the Nagwar site in June, the administration plans to expand offshore wind capacity to at least 25 gigawatts by 2035 through greater investment in technology, grids, port, and supply chains. Beyond generating power, experts say the true measure of offshore wind lies in the value it returns to local communities through long-term opportunities like additional jobs and tax revenue. This means offshore wind power can turn residents from compensation recipients into lasting partners in the transition to more renewable energy. Shin So-eun, Arirang News, Yeonggwang.
Also here in Korea, a half-thin transparent brain implant has taken scientists a step closer to artificial vision. Our Pyongyang shows us how.
This is a transparent neural electrode developed by a national research team. It is thinner than a single strand of hair. Usually, when an electrode is transparent, its electrical conductivity is low. The team overcame this limitation by evenly coating the electrode surface with an ultra-thin layer of gold atoms. With the thickness of the gold-coated film down from the conventional 100 nanometers to just 10 nanometers, the total thickness is a mere 4 micrometers. While allowing over 65% of light to pass through, the electrode still maintained its performance in measuring electrical signals at conventional levels. Furthermore, the team confirmed that it could provoke a visual response in blind mice similar to actual sight. The transparent electrode was placed on the surface of the brain of a blind mouse. When the neurons were stimulated using light through a technique called optogenetics, it generated artificial vision signals that showed a 78% similarity to the brain signals of a fully sighted mouse. Although this study opens doors for artificial vision, it is still just in the animal testing phase. Young, Arirang News.
This is the world now. In the United States, the Federal Reserve appears to be moving closer to raising interest rates. Minutes from last month's Federal Open Market Committee meeting released on Wednesday show the Fed's deepening concern about inflation. The Fed held its benchmark rate in a range of 3.5 to 3.75% in July, but three policymakers voted for a quarter-point increase. The minutes say, quote, many officials said tightening would likely be needed if inflation does not come down to the Fed's 2% target. Those who favored an increase said price pressures were, quote, broad-based. They warned that waiting could mean a steeper and more costly round of hikes later on. This comes as President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that, quote, interest rates are artificially high and should come down. In Kenya, a tourist helicopter has crashed, killing everyone on board. 5 Americans and Ecuador's head of intelligence are among the 7 dead. The helicopter came down on Wednesday in Samburu County in northern Kenya. It was carrying passengers to a wildlife reserve and safari destination. The U.S. State Department said on Wednesday that 5 Americans were killed. Ecuador's presidential office said its intelligence chief also died along with his wife, a U.S. citizen. The tour company that ran the excursion said the cause of the crash has not been determined. The Kenya Red Cross said difficult terrain and a fire at the site are slowing the recovery. In the United States, drug makers Moderna and Merck said on Wednesday that their experimental cancer vaccine worked in a late-stage trial. It kept melanoma, a deadly skin cancer, from coming back or spreading. The vaccine is built for one patient at a time from the genetic profile of that person's own tumor. More than 1,000 patients took part. Moderna's shares more than doubled on Wednesday, and Merck's stock hit an all-time high. This is the first successful late-stage trial of a personalized mRNA cancer therapy. Judihan, Arirang News.
As we move into the afternoon, light showers have been coming and going across Seoul. With the atmosphere remaining unstable, showers are currently affecting parts of the central and southern regions. Through this evening, some areas could see 5 to 60 millimeters of rain. And with the south coast already saturated from very heavy rain, we'll need to be extra careful about additional damage when showers move in. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 24 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon 23 and Busan 25 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 30 degrees, while the southern regions including Daegu, Gwangju and Jeju will all soar to 32 degrees. This weekend marks Cheoseol, a traditional seasonal milestone that signals the end of summer heat. But don't expect much Cheoseol magic this year. temperatures will still climb to around 33 degrees Celsius. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.